One slap, hundreds of laughing students, and one bully who thought the quiet black girl would never fight back. At Easton Ridge High, Dylan Mercer ruled the school with fear, while everyone else watched in silence. But what he didn't know was that the new girl he humiliated had spent years mastering the one thing he could never understand: discipline. He thought he was creating another victim. Instead, he was about to expose the corruption, cowardice, and prejudice hiding behind the school's perfect reputation. Stay with me until the very end, because the ending will completely change how you see this story. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this video from? And if you had been standing in that schoolyard, would you have stepped in to stop the bullying or stayed silent like everyone else? The first morning at Easton Ridge High always carried an unmistakable energy. Students gathered in clusters across the front entrance, laughing, scrolling through their phones, or greeting teammates before the first bell. Expensive cars lined the curb while teachers supervised the flow of teenagers entering the campus. It looked like the perfect American high school from the outside. But beneath the polished brick buildings and championship banners lived an invisible hierarchy that every student understood. At the very top stood Dylan Mercer, the star quarterback whose family had donated millions to the school. His victories on the football field made him a hero, while his family's influence made him untouchable. Everyone knew that crossing Dylan meant becoming the next target, and nobody wanted that burden. A Silver City bus stopped quietly outside the front gate. Among the students stepping off was 17-year-old Nia Brooks. Carrying nothing more than a navy backpack and a folder of transfer papers, she paused for a moment, studying the towering entrance with calm, observant eyes. This was her third school in 4 years, and she had promised herself that this one would be different. She wasn't looking for friends or attention. She wanted one thing only: to finish her senior year in peace. Taking a slow breath, she adjusted the strap on her shoulder and walked through the gates without noticing the dozens of curious eyes already following her. Her simple navy t-shirt, white skirt, and quiet confidence stood out in a crowd obsessed with expensive brands and social status. Whispers spread almost immediately. "Who's the new girl? Never seen her before. Transfer student. She doesn't look nervous." That last observation caught Dylan Mercer's attention. Standing beside his closest friends, Cole Dawson and Tyler Reed, he watched the newcomer weave through the crowd without lowering her head or searching for approval. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't intimidated either. Dylan had built his reputation on reading people within seconds. Freshmen cried. Transfer students avoided eye contact. Scholarship. Kids usually tried to disappear. This girl did none of those things. She simply walked forward with a steady pace, as if the opinions around her meant nothing. To Dylan, that looked less like confidence and more like a challenge. A slow grin appeared on his face. "Let's welcome our new student," he muttered. Cole and Tyler exchanged amused looks before following him through the crowd. Nia had barely reached the main hallway when Dylan deliberately stepped into her path. Their shoulders collided with enough force to knock her folder onto the polished floor. Papers scattered in every direction. Conversations nearby stopped as students instinctively sensed another one of Dylan's performances about to begin. Dylan tilted his head with a mocking smile. "You should watch where you're going." Nia looked at the papers surrounding her feet before meeting his eyes. She had clearly felt the intentional shove, yet her expression never changed. "I'm sorry," she said quietly as she knelt to gather her documents. Several students laughed. Cole leaned against a locker. "Seriously, he ran into you." Tyler pulled out his phone. "Already recording." "She's apologizing." He laughed. "This is going to be easy." Nia finished collecting her papers without another word. She neither defended herself nor argued. She simply stood, nodded politely, and continued walking toward the administration office. Dylan watched her disappear down the hallway. "She's scared already," he said confidently. None of his friends questioned that conclusion. Throughout the morning, Dylan's group turned Nia into the school's newest source of entertainment. Every time she walked into a classroom, whispers followed. Someone imitated her voice. Another student commented on her clothes. A few laughed at her worn backpack. Others crossed the line completely, making racist jokes loud enough for her to hear. Tyler filmed nearly everything, hoping to create another viral clip for social media. The videos always attracted thousands of views whenever Dylan appeared. And humiliating. Another student was simply part of the routine. Yet something about Nia frustrated them. She never reacted. She never shouted. She never cried. She never begged them to stop. She simply continued walking, focusing on finding her classrooms, thanking teachers who offered directions, and keeping her attention fixed on the day ahead. Her silence was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of discipline, though nobody around her recognized the difference. Near the gymnasium, Coach Marcus Ellis stood speaking with another teacher when he noticed the transfer student passing by. His eyes followed her almost absent-mindedly until something unexpected caught his attention. As Dylan deliberately brushed against her shoulder once again, Nia shifted her weight instinctively. The movement lasted less than a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. Coach Ellis did. Her feet settled naturally into perfect balance. Her shoulders remained relaxed. Her breathing never changed. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was muscle memory, the kind developed only after years of disciplined training. Coach Ellis narrowed his eyes but said nothing. He had spent decades coaching athletes and had worked with competitive martial artists before becoming a physical education teacher. There was something remarkably familiar about the way the girl carried herself. As though every movement had been practiced thousands of times, the lunch bell finally echoed across campus, sending hundreds of students flooding into the courtyard. Dylan saw another opportunity to entertain the crowd. Surrounded by teammates and eager spectators, he walked directly toward Nia as she searched for an empty table. "Hey," he called loudly. She stopped. "I told you this school has rules." Nia answered calmly. "I don't remember breaking any." The surrounding students formed a circle almost instantly. Dylan stepped closer until only inches separated them. "You don't get to ignore me." Before anyone could react, his hand swung across the air. The sharp slap echoed through the schoolyard. Nia's head turned slightly from the impact. A stunned silence lasted only a heartbeat before laughter erupted from every direction. Phones rose into the air, recording every second. Some students cheered. Others simply watched without moving. Slowly, Nia turned back to face Dylan. She didn't raise her fists. She didn't step forward. She didn't strike back. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes with a calmness that made even the laughter begin to fade. From across the courtyard, Coach Ellis frowned. The way she stood after absorbing the blow was unmistakable. Her posture was identical to that of experienced fighters, preparing for an attack, not someone frozen by fear. Nia's voice was barely louder than a whisper, but Dylan heard every word. "This is the first time." She paused without breaking eye contact. "Don't let there be a second." Around them, the laughter disappeared, replaced by an uneasy silence, as no one could explain why those quiet words suddenly felt more intimidating than any shout. The video of the slap spread through Easton Ridge High long before the lunch period had ended. By the time students returned to their afternoon classes, nearly everyone had already watched the 15-second clip. Tyler Reed had uploaded it to 3 different social media platforms, adding dramatic music and a caption that read, "New girl learns her place." Within an hour, Students were replaying the footage in classrooms, locker rooms, and hallways. Every replay ended with the same burst of laughter as Nia Brooks stood motionless after Dylan Mercer's slap. No one had bothered to record what she said afterward. Tyler had stopped filming the moment he thought the humiliation was complete. To everyone watching, the story seemed obvious. The quiet transfer student had been too frightened to defend herself. The whispers followed Nia everywhere she went. As she walked through the crowded hallway, conversations stopped just long enough for students to glance at her, before smirking at one another. Some repeated Dylan's words from the video. Others exaggerated the story, claiming she had begged him to stop or burst into tears after the cameras were turned off. None of it was true. But rumors traveled much faster than facts. A few students intentionally brushed past her shoulder, testing whether she would react. Others laughed openly whenever she passed. Nia ignored every comment. She walked at the same steady pace she had shown that morning, carrying her books close to her chest, her face calm despite the storm surrounding her. To everyone else, her silence looked like surrender. In reality, she was carefully keeping a promise she had made years earlier, to never allow anger to control her decisions. Across campus, Dylan leaned comfortably against his locker like a king surveying his kingdom. Cole and Tyler scrolled through the growing number of likes and comments on the video, reading the funniest ones aloud between bursts of laughter. Over 50,000 views already. Tyler said proudly, "People love this." Cole grinned. "She's probably packing her bags tonight." Dylan folded his arms, satisfied with the attention. "I told you she'd fold." They always do? He wasn't simply enjoying popularity anymore. Every smile, every laugh from passing students reinforced his belief that he controlled the entire school. Teachers rarely questioned him. Coaches praised him for winning championships. His parents donated enough money that administrators often overlooked complaints involving his behavior. As far as Dylan was concerned, consequences belonged to other people. Nia Brooks had become just another name on the long list of students who had learned that lesson the hard way. Inside the cafeteria, the atmosphere felt no different. Students gathered around tables replaying the clip while pointing toward Nia, who sat alone near the windows with an unopened lunch tray. She wasn't scrolling through social media or reading the comments that continued multiplying online. Instead, she quietly reviewed her class schedule, making notes about homework and tomorrow's assignments. She could hear the laughter. She could hear someone imitating the sound of the slap. She could even hear a group nearby placing fake bets on how many days she would last before transferring again. Yet she refused to give them the reaction they desperately wanted. Not everyone found the scene entertaining. Olivia Hart, one of the school's most popular TikTok creators, watched the cafeteria from another table. Unlike Tyler, Olivia wasn't interested in humiliating people. She built her online following by documenting student life, sports events, and funny campus moments. At first, she had laughed at the viral clip like everyone else. But as she observed Nia sitting alone, untouched food in front of her, something felt wrong. The girl didn't look broken. She didn't even look angry. She looked focused, almost as though the chaos surrounding her existed somewhere far away. That evening, Olivia couldn't stop thinking about the strange expression she had seen on Nia's face. The next morning, she arrived at school earlier than usual, hoping to film the sunrise over the football field for a new video. As she walked behind the gymnasium, an unfamiliar sound interrupted the quiet morning air. Soft footsteps moved rhythmically across the concrete. Curious, Olivia followed the noise until she reached the practice area behind the athletic building. She froze. Nia stood alone beneath the pale morning sky. There was no music, no audience, no mirrors, only silence. With smooth precision, She flowed through a series of martial arts techniques, unlike anything Olivia had ever seen. Every movement was controlled. Every turn stopped at exactly the right position. Her kicks cut through the air with remarkable speed but ended inches before an imaginary target. Her breathing remained perfectly steady as she transitioned effortlessly from defensive stances into graceful combinations that required extraordinary balance. There was no unnecessary force, no dramatic shouting, only years of disciplined repetition visible in every motion. Olivia instinctively raised her phone and began recording. She had filmed countless athletes before, but this felt different. Nia wasn't showing off. She clearly believed no one was watching. That made the performance even more astonishing. This wasn't someone who had taken a few self-defense classes. This was someone who had trained seriously for years. Before Olivia could step closer, Nia finished her routine, collected her backpack, and quietly walked toward the school building without noticing the hidden camera. Olivia stared down at the video she had just captured. If people saw this, she whispered. Her thumb hovered over the upload button. Then she stopped. Something told her there was more to this story than a simple viral moment. Instead of posting the footage, she saved it in a private folder on her phone. Meanwhile, Dylan was preparing something far crueler than another slap. Inside the football locker room, surrounded by teammates who admired everything he did, he paced confidently across the room while outlining his latest idea. "We're ending this today," he announced. Cole raised an eyebrow. How Dylan smiled. "We'll make her apologize." Tyler laughed. "For what?" "For disrespecting me." The room erupted in laughter. Dylan continued, his confidence growing with every word. "Tomorrow at lunch, right in the middle of the courtyard, she'll get on her knees and apologize in front of everyone. If she refuses," he shrugged casually, "we'll make sure she regrets it." Several teammates cheered. None of them questioned whether the plan had gone too far. As students began leaving the locker room, Dylan slipped his phone into his pocket and looked toward the hallway outside with absolute certainty. His voice was low, cold, and filled with confidence. "Today," he muttered, "I'm going to make you disappear from this school," unaware that Olivia was now carrying a secret capable of changing everything. Dylan walked toward the cafeteria, convinced the next public humiliation would finally break the quiet girl who refused to show fear. The following afternoon, anticipation hung over Easton Ridge High like a gathering storm. News of Dylan Mercer's so-called public apology had spread through every classroom before lunch even began. Students whispered excitedly in the hallways, eager to witness what many believed would be the final humiliation of the quiet transfer student. Phones were fully charged. Cameras were ready. And dozens of social media accounts announced they would be live streaming the event. For most students, it wasn't about justice or truth anymore. It had become entertainment. They expected tears, begging, and another viral clip to laugh about before the school day ended. No one imagined they were about to witness something that would completely change the way they looked at Nia Brooks. Nia crossed the schoolyard carrying her lunch tray with the same calm expression she had worn since arriving at Easton Ridge. She noticed the unusual silence as conversations gradually faded around her. Students formed a loose circle, creating an open space in the center of the courtyard without anyone asking them to. She immediately understood what was happening. Dylan had arranged another public spectacle. Taking a slow breath, she continued walking without changing direction. She had spent years learning that fear often grew stronger when acknowledged. If she kept moving, perhaps the situation could still end without violence. Dylan stepped directly into her path, flanked by Cole Dawson, Tyler Reed, and several members of the football team, Their confident smiles suggested they had already rehearsed this moment in their minds. Tyler lifted his phone and pointed the camera toward Nia before speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Looks like our celebrity finally showed up." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Dylan folded his arms and looked around theatrically, making sure every pair of eyes was focused on him before turning back to Nia. "I gave you a chance yesterday," he said. "Today you're going to apologize in front of everyone." Nia met his gaze calmly. "I don't owe you an apology." The simple answer surprised the crowd. It wasn't loud or emotional, but it carried enough certainty to erase a few of the smiles surrounding them. Dylan's expression hardened. "You really think you have a choice?" "I always have a choice." Someone in the crowd laughed nervously, but the atmosphere had already begun to shift. Dylan wasn't used to hearing anyone refuse him so directly. Cole stepped closer. "Just kneel down," he mocked. "Save yourself the embarrassment." Nia shook her head. "I'm not going to do that." For a brief moment, Dylan considered walking away. His pride, however, wouldn't allow it. Too many students were watching. Too many cameras were recording. If he backed down now, even slightly, the image he had built over years would begin to crack. Without warning, he reached forward and grabbed a handful of Nia's hair, yanking her sharply toward him. Gasps echoed across the courtyard. Several students laughed again. Encouraged by Dylan's display of dominance, Nia's body shifted naturally to absorb the sudden pull. But she still refused to resist. She slowly freed herself from his grip and stepped backward. Her voice remained steady. "Don't touch me again." Dylan threw his head back and laughed. "You still think you're in a position to give warnings?" The surrounding students cheered his response. Some chanted Dylan's name. Others shouted for him to finish what he started. Across the courtyard, Coach Marcus Ellis watched anxiously from the athletic building. Beside the administration office, school security officer Frank Walker also noticed the growing crowd. A retired martial arts competitor who had spent years working in youth sports before joining campus security, Frank recognized the tension immediately. He started walking toward the gathering, though he was still too far away to intervene. Dylan stepped closer until he stood only inches from Nia. "I'll ask one last time." He leaned forward. "Are you going to apologize?" Nia looked directly into his eyes. "No." The answer came without hesitation. The next sound echoed across the entire courtyard. Slap. Dylan struck her across the face for the second time. Several students erupted into cheers, while dozens of phones captured every angle they could. Nia slowly turned her head back toward him. A faint red mark appeared on her cheek, yet her breathing never changed. She looked almost disappointed. "This is the second time," she said quietly. "I asked you not to do this." Dylan smirked. "What are you going to do about it?" Before anyone could answer, he drew back his fist, intending to throw the first punch. Everything that happened next lasted less than 2 seconds. As Dylan's arm drove forward, Nia moved. There was no dramatic spinning kick, no wild swing, no attack. She stepped slightly to one side with effortless precision. One hand redirected Dylan's momentum, while the other gently controlled his wrist. Using nothing more than timing, balance, and leverage, she rotated his arm into a controlled joint lock. Dylan's confident expression vanished instantly. His body twisted involuntarily as the pressure traveled through his shoulder and elbow. His knees buckled. Within seconds, the strongest athlete in school was kneeling on the concrete, unable to move without increasing the pain. The courtyard fell silent. No one understood what they had just witnessed. Nia wasn't punching him. She wasn't kicking him. She wasn't even shouting. She simply held his arm in a position that prevented him from attacking again. Her face remained calm. "So please," she said softly, "don't make me hurt you." Dylan gritted his teeth, struggling to free himself. Every attempt only tightened the lock. For the first time in years, the star quarterback looked completely helpless. Even Cole and Tyler froze, unsure whether they should intervene. Coach Ellis stopped several yards away, stunned by the flawless execution of the technique. It wasn't just effective, it was disciplined. There had been no wasted movement, no anger, and no unnecessary force. Standing near the administration building, Frank Walker narrowed his eyes. His years of competitive martial arts training allowed him to recognize details invisible to everyone else. The foot placement, the angle of the wrist, the body positioning, the restraint. His expression changed immediately. "That," he whispered under his breath, "I know that technique. It wasn't something taught in ordinary self-defense classes or neighborhood gyms. It belonged to an advanced national training system used by elite competitive martial artists, emphasizing control over aggression and defense over retaliation." Frank looked at Nia with growing disbelief. Whoever this girl was, she had received years of professional instruction, and yet she had chosen not to strike back. As security finally hurried forward to separate them, another student standing on the second-floor balcony quietly lowered a phone that had been recording the entire confrontation from above. Unlike Tyler's dramatic close-up, this camera had captured everything. Dylan grabbing Nia's hair, the second slap, the attempted punch, and Nia responding only to protect herself. Without realizing it, someone now possessed the complete truth from the one angle. No one on the ground had even noticed. The confrontation in the schoolyard exploded across social media within minutes. Students uploaded clips from every angle they had managed to capture, and hashtags mentioning Easton Ridge High quickly began trending among nearby schools. For the first time, however, the comments were divided. Some viewers praised Dylan Mercer as the victim, claiming the transfer student had attacked the school's football captain without warning. Others questioned why every available video seemed to begin only after Dylan was already on his knees. The missing moments before the confrontation left room for speculation. But before anyone could uncover the truth, the school's administration stepped in to take control of the narrative. By the following morning, Principal Richard Vaughn had called an emergency meeting with senior staff, the athletic department, and Dylan's parents. Mr. and Mrs. Bai Mercer arrived with their family attorney, making it clear that they expected the school to protect both Dylan's reputation and the football program. They argued that the viral footage portrayed Easton Ridge as an unsafe campus, and insisted the administration act immediately before local news outlets became involved. Principal Vaughn understood exactly what was at stake. Dylan was not only the school's star athlete, but also the son of one of its largest financial supporters. A public scandal could threaten donations, sponsorships, and the prestigious image the school had spent years building. Later that afternoon, the administration released an official statement to students and parents. Attached was a carefully edited security video showing only the final seconds of the confrontation. It began with Nia Brooks holding Dylan's arm in a joint lock while he knelt on the ground in visible pain. The footage ended before security officers separated them. There was no sign of Dylan grabbing her hair, no record of the second slap, no evidence that he had thrown the first punch. To anyone watching the edited version, it appeared as though Nia had suddenly attacked a fellow student with advanced fighting skills. Rumors spread even faster than before. Many students accepted the school's version without question, while others quietly wondered why the recording seemed incomplete. Nia was summoned to the principal's office, where she was informed that she had been suspended pending further review for using excessive physical force against another student. She listened without interrupting, her expression calm despite the obvious injustice. Across campus, Dylan received an entirely different treatment. During football practice, Coach Daniels praised him for showing remarkable restraint under pressure, calling him an example of leadership after a difficult incident. The applause from his teammates echoed through the locker room, strengthening the false story now accepted by most of the school. Only one person knew the complete truth. Olivia Hart had never deleted the video she secretly recorded behind the gym, and she had also received another full recording from a student who filmed the entire confrontation from the second-floor balcony. Together, the two videos clearly showed Dylan initiating every act of aggression, while Nia responded only to defend herself. Olivia watched the footage repeatedly that evening, her finger hovering over the upload button. If she released it, everything would change. Yet she also knew exposing the truth would put her directly against the most powerful family in the school. She finally locked her phone, placed it beside her bed, and decided to wait until she understood the consequences. Just after midnight, while Olivia slept upstairs, the screen of her phone suddenly lit up. Someone was trying to unlock it. The suspension gave Nia Brooks something she had not experienced in weeks' silence, away from the crowded hallways and constant whispers of Easton Ridge High. She returned to the small house she shared with her mother on the edge of town. The headlines on social media continued to paint her as the violent transfer student, but she refused to read the comments. Instead, she quietly unpacked her school bag and placed it beside an old wooden cabinet where a faded gold medal rested inside a dusty display case. It was the only visible reminder of a chapter in her life she had tried desperately to leave behind. Years earlier, Nia had been one of the country's brightest young martial arts talents. She had won junior championships with remarkable discipline, earning respect not because she was aggressive, but because she possessed extraordinary control. Coaches often praised her ability to stop a strike just inches before contact, a skill that required countless hours of practice. Her future had seemed limitless until one afternoon during an intense training session, a routine sparring match turned into a tragic accident when her training partner lost balance during a throw, landing awkwardly and suffering a serious shoulder injury. Although the injury eventually healed, the guilt never did. Nia blamed herself completely. From that day forward, she walked away from competition and made a promise she repeated every morning. She would never use her martial arts skills to hurt someone unless there was absolutely no other choice. The following afternoon, Nia returned to the old martial arts club where she had once trained. The building looked smaller than she remembered, its faded walls carrying memories of years filled with discipline, sacrifice, and quiet determination. Waiting inside was her former coach, Daniel Hayes, the man who had guided her since childhood. He greeted her with a warm smile but quickly noticed the sadness hidden behind her calm expression. "I saw the videos," he said gently. Nia lowered her eyes. "They think I attacked him." Coach Hayes nodded before answering with the same patience he had shown throughout her training. "You didn't lose control. I still used the technique. You used it to stop an attack." She remained silent. After a long pause, the coach stepped closer. "Listen carefully. Nia, self-defense is not violence. Violence is choosing to hurt someone when you don't have to. What you did was protect yourself and stop the danger. Those are not the same thing." His words settled heavily in the quiet training hall. For the first time since the incident, Nia allowed herself to believe that perhaps she had not broken the promise she made years ago. Later that evening, Coach Hayes searched online for more information about the confrontation. As he watched interviews and read articles, one name immediately caught his attention: Dylan Mercer. His expression changed the moment he recognized the surname, Mercer. It couldn't be a coincidence. Years earlier, a wealthy businessman bearing the same name had withdrawn sponsorship from the Martial Arts Association after refusing to support community programs. Without that funding, Hayes's original training academy had been forced to close, ending the dreams of dozens of promising young athletes. Staring at Dylan's photograph, he realized the teenager now bullying Nia was the son of the very family whose influence had destroyed his club years before. Coach Hayes slowly closed his laptop. "This has gone on long enough," he murmured. The next morning, before classes began at Easton Ridge High, he put on his jacket, picked up a folder containing years of competition records, and walked toward his car. He had made his decision. This time, Nia would not have to face the truth alone. The auditorium at Easton Ridge High had never felt so tense. Rows of folding chairs were filled with parents, teachers, school board members, and student representatives who had been invited to witness the disciplinary hearing surrounding the confrontation between Nia Brooks and Dylan Mercer. What had started as a hallway incident had become the biggest controversy the school had faced in years. At the front of the room sat Principal Richard Vaughn, flanked by several administrators. Across from them were Dylan's parents and their attorney, Charles Whitmore, a polished lawyer known for protecting influential families. Nia entered quietly beside her mother and Coach Daniel Hayes, who had insisted on attending despite no longer working for the school. Every eye in the room followed them, but Nia refused to look toward Dylan. She simply took her seat and waited for the truth or what passed for it to unfold. Attorney Whitmore stood first. With calm confidence, he described Dylan as an outstanding student, a respected athlete, and a young man who had shown remarkable restraint during an unfortunate conflict. He argued that Nia had embarrassed the football captain in front of the entire school by using advanced combat techniques that placed him at risk of serious injury. Turning toward the school board, he concluded that the only appropriate resolution was for Nia to issue a public apology to Dylan and accept responsibility for escalating the incident. Dylan's parents nodded approvingly, while Principal Vaughn remained silent, giving the impression that the recommendation had already been accepted. Just as the principal prepared to announce the school's final decision, the rear doors of the auditorium opened. Olivia Hart walked inside. The room turned toward her in surprise as she hurried down the center aisle, holding her phone tightly in one hand. "I'm sorry for interrupting," she said, slightly out of breath, "but everyone deserves to see what actually happened." Before anyone could stop her, Olivia connected her phone to the auditorium projector. The giant screen flickered to life. This time, the video did not begin with Dylan on his knees. It began with him blocking Nia's path. Then came the insults, the deliberate shove, the moment he grabbed her hair, the second slap, his fist drawing back to strike. Only then did Nia move, calmly redirecting his attack into a controlled joint lock without throwing a single punch. The room fell into absolute silence. No whispers, no arguments. Even Dylan lowered his eyes as the recording continued to its final frame. For the first time, everyone saw the complete story, exactly as it had happened. Coach Hayes looked toward the school board without saying a word. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Several parents exchanged uneasy glances. One teacher quietly shook her head. Even Attorney Whitmore hesitated before attempting to respond, realizing that every argument he had made only minutes earlier had collapsed under the weight of the unedited footage. For a brief moment, it seemed justice had finally arrived. Principal Vaughn stared at the frozen image on the projector before slowly rising from his chair. The audience expected him to apologize, reverse the suspension, and acknowledge the school's mistake. Instead, he cleared his throat. While this new evidence provides additional context, he said carefully, "Our disciplinary committee believes that the use of advanced physical techniques by a student still raises serious safety concerns." A wave of disbelief swept through the auditorium. "Therefore," he continued, "the suspension of Nia Brooks will remain in effect pending further review." Gasps echoed across the room. Coach Hayes clenched his jaw. Nia's mother looked stunned. Even Olivia could hardly believe what she had just heard. The truth had finally been revealed. Yet the punishment remained exactly the same. As students and parents slowly left the auditorium, frustration replaced silence, hidden behind the last row of seats. However, someone quietly watched Olivia slip her phone back into her pocket. That person now knew exactly where the original video was stored. The meeting that was supposed to restore confidence in Easton Ridge High had achieved the exact opposite. Instead of ending the controversy, Principal Richard Vaughn's decision to uphold Nia Brooks' suspension, despite overwhelming evidence, ignited outrage throughout the campus. By the next morning, students were no longer arguing about whether Nia had acted in self-defense. They were asking a far more uncomfortable question: if the school ignored clear evidence in such a public case, how many other incidents had been buried over the years? The answer began to emerge faster than anyone expected. At first, it was only anonymous messages posted on student forums. A sophomore described being shoved into lockers by Dylan Mercer during freshman year after refusing to complete his homework. Another student admitted that she had transferred out of advanced chemistry because Dylan and his friends mocked her every day until she stopped speaking in class. As more stories appeared, students realized they were reading experiences that sounded disturbingly familiar. Different victims, different years, the same names, the same pattern. Dylan would intimidate someone. His friends would record or laugh, and nothing would happen after the incident was reported. The silence that had protected him for years began to crack. Inspired by Olivia Hart's courage in revealing the original video, more students decided they no longer wanted to remain anonymous. One after another, they stepped forward publicly. A senior admitted that Dylan had destroyed his science project before a statewide competition. A freshman revealed screenshots of threatening messages sent after refusing to hand over lunch money. Another student produced photographs of damaged personal belongings that had been dismissed by administrators as pranks. Each story alone might have been ignored, but together they formed a pattern that was impossible to dismiss. The revelations extended beyond the student body. During an emergency faculty meeting, English teacher Laura Bennett finally confessed that she had reported Dylan's behavior several times over the previous 3 years. Each complaint had quietly disappeared, without any meaningful investigation. Another teacher admitted he had been warned to focus on academics instead of involving himself in disciplinary issues concerning the football program. Even Coach Marcus Ellis reluctantly acknowledged that several athletes had privately complained about Dylan's bullying. But none had been willing to make formal statements because they feared retaliation. News of these testimonies spread quickly beyond the school walls. Parents began demanding answers. Community groups questioned why repeated complaints had never resulted in disciplinary action. Local reporters started contacting former students, searching for anyone willing to describe the culture inside Easton Ridge High. The school's carefully polished reputation began to unravel with astonishing speed. What had once been celebrated as one of the state's premier high schools was now being criticized for protecting influence instead of protecting students. Principal Vaughn found himself surrounded by growing pressure from every direction. School board members demanded internal reviews, while concerned parents threatened to withdraw their children if meaningful reforms were not introduced. Even several of the school's longtime donors privately questioned whether continuing to defend Dylan was worth the mounting public damage. For the first time in years, the administration appeared uncertain. reacting to events instead of controlling them. Meanwhile, Dylan discovered that admiration could disappear just as quickly as it had arrived. Students who once laughed at his jokes now walked past him without speaking. Some teammates avoided sitting beside him in the locker room. Others quietly deleted old social media posts that celebrated his behavior. The confidence that had defined him for years slowly gave way to frustration and isolation. Late that evening, as Olivia reviewed new messages from students willing to share their experiences, an unfamiliar email notification appeared on her screen. The sender identified himself only as class of 2021. Attached was a folder labeled "Evidence They Never Wanted You to See." Within 48 hours, the story had escaped the boundaries of Easton Ridge High. What began as a student-recorded video was now spreading across every major social media platform. Olivia Hart's decision to publish the complete footage changed everything. Unlike the edited clip released by the school, the original recording showed every second of the confrontation without interruption. Viewers watched Dylan Mercer block Nia Brooks' path, insult her, pull her hair, slap her across the face for a second time, and attempt to throw a punch before Nia calmly neutralized the attack using a single defensive technique. There was no retaliation, no unnecessary force, and no attempt to humiliate him. The contrast between the school's official narrative and the undeniable evidence shocked millions of viewers. Overnight, the original video accumulated millions of views, while thousands of comments questioned how such obvious facts had been ignored. Support for Nia grew at an astonishing pace. Former students shared their own memories of bullying at Easton Ridge, while parents posted messages praising Nia's restraint under pressure. Martial arts instructors from around the country commented on the video, explaining that her technique demonstrated remarkable discipline because she had chosen control instead of aggression. Many pointed out that an untrained person would likely have responded with panic or excessive force, whereas Nia had ended the confrontation with the minimum action necessary to protect herself. The conversation was no longer centered on a fight between two students. It had become a debate about accountability, abuse of power, and whether prestigious schools protected their reputations at the expense of vulnerable students. Local news organizations soon picked up the story. Television crews appeared outside the school gates, interviewing parents as students arrived for class. Reporters repeatedly asked the same question: why had Easton Ridge High released an edited video while withholding the footage that clearly showed Dylan initiating the violence? Principal Richard Vaughn attempted to defend the school's actions during a brief press conference, insisting that administrators had acted according to existing disciplinary policies. His carefully prepared statement, however, failed to satisfy reporters, who pressed him about the missing footage and the growing number of former students describing similar experiences. The principal ended the conference early without answering several key questions, a decision that only fueled further public criticism. Meanwhile, the Mercer family discovered that influence did not extend as far beyond the school as they had believed. Several local business partners quietly distanced themselves from the family, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. Community organizations postponed fundraising events where Dylan's father had been scheduled to appear as a guest speaker. Even some longtime supporters privately advised the family to stop attacking Nia publicly, and instead acknowledge the evidence that had become impossible to dispute. For the first time, the Mercers found themselves reacting to events rather than controlling them. Under mounting public pressure, the school board called a special meeting that attracted an unusually large audience. Parents filled every available seat, while journalists lined the back of the room with cameras and notebooks. Student representatives sat beside teachers, all waiting to hear how the administration intended to respond. Principal Vaughn once again defended the school's decisions, arguing that administrators had simply acted on the information available at the time. His explanation was interrupted by Margaret Ellis, one of the longest-serving members of the school board. Speaking slowly but firmly, she revealed that the current crisis had not appeared overnight. For years, she said, I have repeatedly raised concerns about bullying complaints involving certain students. I requested independent reviews. I asked for stronger disciplinary procedures. I warned that ignoring repeated reports would eventually damage both our students and our school's integrity. The room fell silent. She continued, those recommendations were acknowledged and then quietly set aside. Several board members lowered their eyes. Parents exchanged uneasy glances. Reporters immediately began writing down every word. Principal Vaughn remained silent, unable to dispute the statement without contradicting official meeting records. For many in attendance, Margaret Ellis's admission confirmed what they had already begun to suspect. The problem was not one isolated incident, but a culture that had allowed misconduct to continue unchecked for years. As the meeting concluded, the board voted unanimously to authorize an independent investigation into the handling of bullying complaints, disciplinary procedures, and the administration's response to the incident involving Nia Brooks and Dylan Mercer. The announcement was met with cautious applause from the audience. It did not erase the harm that had already been done, but it marked the first official step toward uncovering the full truth. Outside the meeting hall, reporters rushed to file breaking news alerts, while parents gathered in small groups discussing what the investigation might reveal. Across town, Nia watched the coverage quietly from her living room. Knowing the battle was far from over, the evidence had finally shifted public opinion. But one question remained unanswered. If years of complaints had truly been ignored, what else was still hidden inside the school's records, and who had worked so hard to keep those secrets buried? The announcement surprised almost everyone who knew Nia Brooks. Less than 2 weeks after becoming the center of the biggest controversy Easton Ridge High had ever faced, she received an official invitation to compete in the State Youth Martial Arts Invitational, one of the region's most respected tournaments. The invitation came directly from the state federation after several coaches recognized her defensive technique in the now famous schoolyard video. To them, Nia represented the very principles martial arts were meant to teach: discipline, restraint, and self-control under pressure. Yet when Coach Daniel Hayes handed her the envelope, she didn't even open it. She quietly placed it on the kitchen table and shook her head. I'm not going back, she said softly. Coach Hayes didn't argue. He understood why. For Nia, martial arts no longer represented trophies or championships. Every memory of competition was overshadowed by the accident years earlier that had injured her training partner and convinced her she had failed the very values she had been taught. Walking back onto a competition mat felt less like an opportunity and more like reopening a wound that had never fully healed. Even after the events at Easton Ridge, she still believed the best victory was avoiding a fight altogether. Over the next several days, invitations continued to arrive. Former teammates reached out with encouraging messages. Tournament organizers personally called Coach Hayes, hoping he could persuade her to reconsider. Several instructors who had defended her publicly on social media explained that young athletes across the state had begun looking up to her, not because she had defeated someone, but because she had shown extraordinary restraint when almost anyone else would have reacted with anger. Nia thanked each of them politely. Then she declined again. Coach Hayes finally invited her back to the old training hall, where dust-covered championship banners still hung from the walls. The building remained quiet, carrying the familiar scent of polished wood and worn training mats. Without saying much, the coach handed Nia a pair of practice gloves she had left behind years earlier. You think people are asking you to come back because they want to see you win? He said. She looked down at the gloves without answering. They don't. He paused. They want to see someone remind them what martial arts actually mean. Nia slowly looked up. Coach Hayes continued. Strength isn't measured by how hard you can hit someone. It's measured by how many times you choose not to. Those words lingered in the silence long after he stopped speaking. A week later, Nia quietly accepted the invitation. Not because she wanted another medal. Not because she wanted public attention. But because she realized the tournament offered something more important than competition. It was a chance to show that the discipline she had relied on in the schoolyard wasn't unusual. It was exactly what martial arts had always taught. The day of the tournament arrived with an atmosphere completely different from the chaos of Easton Ridge High. Families filled the stands. Children warmed up with nervous excitement. And coaches offered calm instructions from the sidelines. There were no students chasing viral videos, no insults echoing through hallways, and no crowds waiting for someone to fail. For the first time in weeks, Nia felt a sense of peace. Her first match reflected everything she had learned since childhood. She moved with precision rather than aggression, earning points through timing, balance, and technical control instead of overwhelming force. Every action demonstrated respect for her opponent. At the final whistle, both competitors bowed to one another before leaving the mat together. The audience applauded not because the match had been dramatic, but because it embodied the values the sport was built upon. As Nia stepped away from the competition area, Coach Hayes smiled quietly. "You didn't come here to prove you're stronger," he said. She smiled back. "I came to prove I remembered who I wanted to be." Later that afternoon, while waiting for the awards ceremony to begin, Nia glanced toward the spectator stands. Her expression changed. Near the top row sat Dylan Mercer. He wasn't surrounded by teammates. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't recording videos or seeking attention. For the first time since she had met him, he looked completely alone. The confident posture that once intimidated an entire school had disappeared. His shoulders were lowered, and his eyes remained fixed on the competition floor rather than the crowd around him. News of the investigation at Easton Ridge had spread quickly, and Dylan had become the subject of criticism from classmates, parents, and even members of his own football program. The admiration he once took for granted had vanished almost overnight. Their eyes met briefly across the arena. Neither of them spoke. Nia looked away first, uncertain why he had come. The tournament concluded with a modest awards ceremony. As athletes and families slowly began leaving the gymnasium, Coach Hayes packed their equipment while Nia collected her belongings near the exit. Behind her, she heard hesitant footsteps approaching. She turned. Dylan stood several feet away. There was no arrogance in his face, no anger, no audience waiting to cheer him on. He took a slow breath, struggling to find the right words. "Nya." His voice barely rose above the noise of people leaving the arena. "Can we talk?" The question hung in the air, leaving Nia uncertain whether the conversation about to begin would finally bring closure or uncover yet another truth neither of them had expected. The beginning of the new school year felt remarkably different at Easton Ridge High. The same brick buildings stood beneath the morning sun. The same banners welcomed students back to campus. And the same courtyard buzzed with conversations as families gathered for the opening assembly. Yet the atmosphere had changed in ways that could not be measured by decorations or speeches. The independent investigation launched by the school board had confirmed what many had long suspected. Complaints about bullying had been mishandled for years. Disciplinary procedures had favored influential students. And the edited video released after the confrontation between Nia Brooks and Dylan Mercer had deliberately omitted critical evidence. Principal Richard Vaughn had resigned before the investigation concluded. Several administrative policies had been rewritten. and the school board publicly acknowledged that protecting the school's reputation should never come before protecting its students. For the first time in years, Easton Ridge was beginning a school year, not by celebrating athletic achievements or academic rankings, but by promising accountability. Students filled the auditorium with a mixture of curiosity and cautious optimism. Many recognized faces they had not spoken to since the controversy unfolded months earlier. Some remembered how easily they had laughed at a 15-second video without questioning what had happened before the recording began. Others remembered standing silently in the schoolyard, watching someone be humiliated because speaking up seemed too difficult. Those memories lingered quietly as the new principal addressed the audience. Instead of avoiding the school's painful recent history, she spoke openly about it, emphasizing that trust could only be rebuilt through honesty, fairness, and the courage to admit mistakes. Her words were followed not by applause, but by thoughtful silence as students reflected on everything that had changed. Then came the moment no one expected. The principal invited Dylan Mercer onto the stage. A quiet murmur spread through the audience as he walked slowly toward the podium. Gone was the confident football captain who once believed popularity placed him above consequences. Months of public criticism, disciplinary action, and difficult conversations had transformed both his appearance and his posture. He stood before hundreds of students without the swagger that had once defined him. For several long seconds, he simply looked across the audience before taking a deep breath. I spent a long time believing that being respected meant making other people fear me. He began quietly. I told myself they deserved what happened, because I never stopped to think about how my actions affected them. His voice faltered. I was wrong. The auditorium remained completely silent. Dylan turned toward the front row where Nia Brooks was seated beside Coach Daniel Hayes and her mother. Nia, I'm sorry. He did not offer excuses. He did not blame his friends. He did not mention pressure, popularity, or his family's influence. I humiliated you because I thought I could. I hurt people because I believed there would never be consequences. I can't change what I did, but I accept responsibility for it. When he stepped away from the microphone, the room remained still. Everyone waited to see how Nia would respond. She stood calmly and walked onto the stage, looking toward Dylan. She spoke with the same quiet confidence that had never abandoned her. Even on the worst day of her life, I accept your apology. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. But forgiveness, she continued gently, doesn't erase responsibility. She paused before looking across the students filling the auditorium. We're responsible for the choices we make. The people who bully others are responsible for their actions. The people who ignore bullying are responsible for their silence. And the people who have the power to stop injustice are responsible for using that power wisely. Her words echoed throughout the hall. I don't want anyone to remember me because I know martial arts. She smiled slightly. I hope they remember that the strongest person isn't the one who can win every fight. The strongest person is the one who knows when not to fight, who protects others instead of hurting them, and who has the courage to speak when staying silent is easier. The audience rose to its feet in applause. It was not applause for a victory in a fight. It was applause for resilience, accountability, and the possibility of change. Over the following weeks, Easton Ridge introduced sweeping reforms recommended by the independent investigation. The school established a comprehensive anti-bullying program that encouraged students to report harassment without fear of retaliation. Teachers received additional training to recognize early warning signs of intimidation and exclusion, while counselors expanded peer support initiatives to ensure students never felt isolated. One of the most popular additions was a new after-school club focused on practical self-defense, conflict de-escalation, and personal confidence. Coach Hayes agreed to help design the program, and Nia volunteered as a student mentor. Every lesson began with the same principle she had lived by throughout her journey. The purpose of learning self-defense was never to dominate another person, but to protect yourself and others while avoiding unnecessary harm whenever possible. Months later, on a quiet autumn afternoon, the camera seemed to return to the exact place where the story had begun, the schoolyard where a frightened crowd had once laughed as a new student was slapped in front of everyone. The benches, trees, and walkways looked almost unchanged. Yet the people standing there were different. New students crossed the courtyard with confidence. Older students greeted them warmly, and teachers paid closer attention to what happened around them. Nia walked through the same space, carrying her backpack just as she had on her first day. This time, no whispers followed her. No phones were raised to record humiliation. Instead, students smiled, nodded respectfully, and several members of the self-defense club waved as she passed. Anibiwan. The students gathered in the courtyard stood and applauded, not because she had defeated someone, not because she had become famous, but because she had reminded an entire school that true strength is measured not by the power to hurt others, but by the discipline to protect them and the courage to stand against injustice. If you had been standing in that schoolyard on the very first day, would you have stepped in to stop the bullying or remained silent like the crowd? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As this story comes to an end, one thing becomes clear. True strength isn't about throwing the hardest punch. It's about having the courage to stay in control. Stand up for what's right, and refuse to become the very thing you're fighting against. Nia didn't change Easton Ridge High because she was the strongest fighter. She changed it because she refused to let fear, hatred, or prejudice define who she was. But here's the question I'd love to hear your thoughts on. If you had witnessed Dylan slap Nia in that schoolyard, would you have stepped in to stop the bullying? Or would you have remained silent like the crowd? Share your answer in the comments below. We read every one of them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about courage, justice, and standing up against racism and bullying. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.